Howdy and welcome back to the workshop. Sorry, there's something stuck in my throat. Howdy and welcome back to the workshop. Today's episode, I'm going to Italy to hang out with my buddy Oliver Goldschmidt. Oliver is a fantastic bladesmith. He's one of the most inspirational people to me. I steal all of my ideas from him. He's amazing. Highly recommend checking him out on Instagram, Oliver Goldschmidt Knives. We'll talk more about that later on. The reason why I'm visiting him is because I was going to visit my buddy Jordan Lamothe in India, and it just so happened that it worked out quite well to get to sneak down to Italy for a few days on my way to India. Our trip started off bright and early, 3:35 a.m., hopped on a plane from Bozeman to Denver, had a nice little layover in Denver, got a little bit of Chick-fil-A. It was wonderful. From Denver, flew to Chicago, had a quick layover there before getting on the plane, and then had a nice, the plane broke situation. And then we got off the plane and waited for 4 extra hours before flying to Zurich in Switzerland. Now it was a beautiful flight. We got to see the countryside of England and the beaches of Normandy over France, and then had a nice cloudy landing into actual Switzerland. I was able to see the mountains all around. It was stunning. I made it through customs quite quickly in the Zurich airport. It was a lovely, beautiful, modern airport, lots of fun. And I actually made it onto an earlier train than I had planned. It was actually later than my initial planning. I was supposed to take a 9:30 train, and then since the flight got delayed a whole bunch, then I was gonna take like a 3:30 train or something like that, but I made it onto a 1:30 train on my way down to Florence, Italy. My first stop was in Milan. It was a beautiful, stunning train station full of gorgeous rivet work and ironwork, beautiful architecture. I didn't go into like the main body of it. It was all stonework. It was very imposing, which I found out as I Googled it, that it was built in the 30s by Benito Mussolini because he wanted to be imposing, and it worked. It was quite imposing. And terrible dictators aside, the rivet work itself was quite impressive. From Milan, I hopped on a train down to Florence. It was a cool experience getting to see the countryside, but it was dark by the time I got into Florence itself. And Oliver picked me up at the train station, and from there we drove south to his place down in the hills of Tuscany. It was a lot of fun to get to be in Italy again. I visited there 5 years ago with my family, but it was a whole different experience to get to experience it with a local who had spent his whole life there. His business is there, his family is there, he knows the community. It was really a treat. Oliver has a gorgeous shop and a beautiful little truffle hunting dog, and he lives in one of the most beautiful places in the whole world. Little Sebastiano, for those of you that watch Parks and Recreation. So we had a really lovely time. We didn't want to kind of fill our time up by trying to crank out a project. So instead we went and visited a few museums, saw the countryside a little bit. The first museum that we went to was at a beautiful villa estate in Florence. It was a guy's private collection of art and armor and all sorts of stuff, and the inspiration that I got from this place was just crazy. I've been fascinated for a long time with the idea of piercing holes in blades. I haven't really done a whole lot of it because it's just not something that I've really had the time to pursue, but seeing the amount of historical pieces that had hollowed out pommels and pierced guards and hollow handles and pierced handles and crazy patterns that people had took time to do things beautifully, that also changes the strength of the piece by adding surface area onto it, and it also lightens it up, and it also changes things like the balance point and things like that, as well as just giving a dynamic aesthetic to it. It looks different as you turn it around. You can see through, and then it's covered, and it's just a really lovely motif to be able to add onto a piece. So I'm very, very excited to get to play around more with the pierced, hollowed out handles and blades and stuff like that. The arms and armor in here were just amazing. I can't imagine how many hundreds of thousands of hours it took master craftsmen to build all of these pieces. And it was just some guy's private collection that he donated to the state to be put on display, turned into a museum after he passed away. He had a large European collection. He had a ton of Middle Eastern, Ottoman, Indian guns, muzzleloaders, flintlocks, matchlocks, percussion cap guns, just a wild collection of beautiful, beautiful pieces. The Ottoman guns were one of the highlights of that for me. They were just stunningly beautiful, intricate ivory carvings and pearl inlays and gold and jade, and just ridiculously cool techniques that they used to embellish these guns. Beautiful Kaftgari gold inlay, which is the Ottoman and Indian style of gold inlay work. We'll talk more about that in the next video, but it was just lovely, lovely work. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours of work in this guy's private house. It was a sight to see. I saw a handful of weapons that I had never seen before. I'm really fascinated with the kind of mid-18th and 19th century weapons that are a combination of guns and blades, and there was a few of those in there. It's just a weird era of weaponry where they had single-shot percussion cap or flintlock weapons, but then they also, they took a while to reload, so they still used a lot of bladed weapons and whatnot. So it was a cool, small time period of intersection between those two things. And it gave me some cool ideas on how to incorporate that into my work in the future. There was a few stunning collections of small swords and rapiers, and it was lovely to get to see dozens and dozens of these handles, intricate basket hilt guards, and lovely, delicate, beautifully carved and beautifully embellished handles on these European small swords. And that wasn't it. There was also a stunning Japanese arms collection of katanas and subas, which is the round guard that sits between the blade and the handle. Subas are one of my favorite historic weapon components because the Japanese did a lovely, lovely job of embellishing them in some hyper-realistic ways, some somewhat cartoony ways also, but they were oftentimes just gorgeous. Combinations of shakudo and shibuichi, which are Japanese casted alloys that are copper and silver or copper and gold, and then they also did beautiful gold inlay and bronze, and all of this stuff was just amazing. It was also amazing to see the suits of armor, the samurai suits of armor. They were amazingly preserved and just stunning. So that whole museum was a real treat to get to see those things up close. They weren't all displayed awfully well. Thankfully, I had my flashlight with me and was able to get a closer look, much to the chagrin of the people working there who were slightly weirded out by this pasty American getting his nose up on the glass of these pieces. The morning after we went to that museum, I had the pleasure of getting to join Oliver on a hot air balloon ride. Oliver's family runs Tuscany Ballooning, which is a hot air ballooning company, believe it or not, over Tuscany. It was lovely to get to see the whole process of the hot air balloons being lit up. They use a very interesting burner system, kind of similar to a forge burner, but it's shooting a liquefied propane straight up. It heats it up on the way up through some coils, and it's just a really wild, very technically engineered burner that is able to keep a very hefty balloon and a bunch of people safely in the air. And it was a very fun, it wasn't a very crazy ride, we were going nice and slow. It was very calm, very serene, and Tuscany is just so ridiculously beautiful. And Oliver did a great job of piloting the balloon. I highly recommend checking them out if you're in Florence. Well worth it. Just a stunning, stunning place to get to see from a bird's eye view. It was cool to get to see the castles sprinkled around the valleys, as well as some of the wildlife, fish in the river, deer in the fields, and then had a nice landing in an open field. And then while they packed up the balloon, they gave us a lovely fresh breakfast of fruits and vegetables and prosciutto and prosecco, and it was just a great time. And then for the rest of our time, we kind of just hung out, visited a few more museums, saw some more wild pieces, some stunning pieces of craftsmanship at a museum in Old Florence in the downtown. I definitely got some big inspiration from some of these pieces and saw a few weapons that I'd really like to recreate. We had a lot of fun getting our noses right up to the glass and really looking at how they did these pieces. Some of the pieces in here, some of the swords specifically, had really interesting motifs throughout the piece where the handle would have a chain motif or it'd have a scale motif or something like that. It was just a really interesting process. It was just really interesting pieces. It gave me a little bit of insight into some things that I'd like to try in the future. After the last museum, Oliver and I stopped for a quick lunch in downtown Florence before going back and hanging out at his house for a little while longer. The gate that we went out was the Porta Romana, which is the gate that faces towards Rome. I believe every big city in Italy has a gate. Every walled city has a gate that faces towards Rome because it's Rome. And then the day before I left, I got the opportunity to hang out and help out a little bit. I don't actually know if I was helping. I was probably more of a hindrance than anything. I got to help out with harvesting the olives from the 200 trees that Oliver has on his property. It was cool to get to see how they do it, raking the olives onto a net on the ground and then using that net to scoop them up into a basket and just... It's a fairly efficient way to do it. It was a very low pressure. This was not a commercial business or anything like that. This is just olives for his personal family use. And so some family and some friends came over and we just together raked olives out of trees for a few hours and had a great time doing it. After that, we had a quick lunch and I was off for the train station to head back up to Zurich, where I just spent one night, just a few hours of sleep before heading off for my final destination of the trip, which was India. But that's where we're going to cut the traveling for now. Bring you back to Montana for a second. Now, I said it before, but Oliver is one of my favorite bladesmiths. He just thinks differently about things, and the way that he approaches his lines and his flow and just the way that he does things. He's a self-taught bladesmith, and so he figured out how to achieve a very high level of fit and finish in a pretty uninterrupted way. He kind of came up with a lot of those processes himself. Obviously, he does some things the same way that a lot of us do, but the way that I do a pocketed inset fit in my bolsters, where I sink my bolster into a handle, Oliver's the guy that came up with that, as far as I know. And just the way that he designs the flow in his pieces is hugely impressive to me. I really, really respect him as an artist and as a bladesmith, and he's a great friend as well. So he also gave me a few other ideas that I won't spoil for you now that I'm very excited to get to pursue here in the workshop. And he also sent me home with a few gifts. The first one was this beautiful little jeweler's post vise looking thing. It looks like a post vise, it functions like a post vise, but it clamps onto a table and its jaws are 1 inch wide. It's super cute. It's the technical blacksmithing term for it. It's super cute. He also sent me back with this very interesting little jeweler's lathe watchmaker's thing. I don't quite know what it is, but I'm very excited to get to play with it. It basically will give me the opportunity to have a very fine, precise control over spinning something very small. So whether that's twisting wire or, I don't quite know exactly what I'm going to use it for yet, but it's quite cool. It has a big brass gear back here and brass hardware in general, and then a nice little hand-tightening collet here with a Jacob's chuck sort of thing. I don't exactly know what it's from, but it's cool. And then the final thing that he sent me home with, which is probably what I'll use the most, is this 6-pound Italian-style cross-peen hammer. Now, it's a little bit different from the American style of cross-peen that we have, and it's different from the French style as well. A French cross-peen looks very similar in a lot of ways. It's got kind of a rectangular body and a very similar shape to the cross-peen, but that top face of the cross-peen sits flush and is parallel with the top line of the hammer, whereas the Italian style kind of sits in the middle. So normally an American or an English style cross-peen, it would go straight taper from this side and that side to the middle, and that would be the cross-peen. But they made it very hard on themselves and instead cut in this shoulder here, which is, I don't understand why they did it, but it looks super cool. I'm very excited. I'm going to throw a little bit of a longer handle on here, probably a good 18 or 20 inch handle, so that I can use this as a striking hammer. I do have a 6-pound cross-peen already, but it has just a hand hammer length handle on it, and I want to have kind of a mid-length size sledgehammer, and so I'm going to go ahead and clean this guy up, hit it with the wire wheel, oil it up, and then make a nice handle on it, so it'll be a nice light striking hammer. I'll be able to use it in my big bench vise. I'll be able to use it forging on the anvil, and then if I have a striker with me and we need to do a little bit lighter of striking work, this will be the go-to hammer. It's a very nice weight, and it's a very cool shape, and now I have a lovely story behind it as well. So thank you, Oliver, for your hospitality and for having me and for the gifts. I'm very excited for you guys to get to go and check out his work on Instagram because he has some wicked stuff. Well worth a trip over to his Instagram to see it. So thank you to Oliver for your hospitality. I'm very excited to tell you guys about the next leg of my journey in India with Jordan Lamothe. Stay tuned for that episode coming out soon. And thank you to the patrons. I'll see you guys later. Thanks. Bye-bye.